Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the World Wanderers podcast. I am Ryan.
I'm Amanda, and I'm your normal host. And Ryan's your weird host over there.
Yeah, I've been doing a bit of crystal meth this morning, but it should not affect my podcast performance.
That's a joke. We don't do crystal meth.
In the morning.
Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the Galapagos Islands.
Or the Islas Galapagos in Espanol.
Sí, tal vez.
They are the group of islands just off the coast of Ecuador. Made famous because they were where Charles Darwin developed a lot of his theory of evolution.
Yeah, so to say they're just off the coast of Ecuador, I'm not sure is accurate. They're about 800 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. So not just a hop, skip, and a jump. You have to take a plane to get there, which is, I think, one of the big things financially why backpackers don't always go. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we did have the opportunity to go. So we're going to talk a little bit about our experience there. What did you sort of expect, like after we'd booked the Galapagos Islands? What did you have in your mind?
It's funny because I'd heard about the Galapagos Islands through, I think, like science classes and stuff about like Charles Darwin and kind of like the mythology you get about him. So I kind of pictured it as being this like super natural place without much development. I really didn't even know much about like the types of animals you see there and other stuff. And it's funny. I think we've talked before about how what you know about a place can really affect your experience there. And I think I had a situation where it was like, because I didn't know much at all about what I was going to be seeing, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I knew that there was giant tortoises there. I knew that we were going to see some blue-footed boobies. I was hoping to see, which is a bird, FYI, not a lady. I didn't do crystal meth this morning either. I also knew we were going to perhaps see penguins. I was hopeful. Knew that there was snorkeling. But yeah, I had no idea. Like I thought we were going somewhere that was going to be super desolate, just kind of like a scuba snorkeling resort that we were staying at. And it was pretty shocking arriving on the island of Baltra where the airport is. As we stepped off and my hair was just whipped into my face. It was so windy. It was dry and super desert-like. And I was like, what is this? This is so weird. And then we took a ferry across a small channel, like maybe 100 meters over to Santa Cruz, and it was all jungly. It was pretty strange. Yeah,
so your first impression was like this kind of a weird geographic place.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I didn't really expect to be on this like deserty, rocky island. Like, where are all the animals going to be?
So let's like rewind a tiny bit. Just give some background info on the Galapagos. So Galapagos, I didn't know. It's 14 islands. I don't know how many islands I thought there were, but probably not 14. And
I mean, that's just 14 main islands too. I think there's a few more minor islands plus just little like rocky, not little, but like rock islets. Is islets the word? Islets? That are just like outside of the water.
I don't know.
They don't actually classify as an island, a small island.
Yeah, we'll have to consult our pronunciation expert. But I kind of lost my train of thought. What was I going to say?
Oh, 14 islands.
Yeah, 14 islands. And you may not know, but I think I was starting to talk about this earlier about how quite a few people living there on some of the islands, especially the main one, Santa Cruz, is where most of the development is. Most of the people are living. And then 3 more islands have people living on them, and then the rest of the islands are uninhabited. I think there's a bit of research that goes on those islands.
Yeah, I don't think that people can just go to them. I think that they're fairly untouched. Even tours, I think you can snorkel or scuba dive around them, but you can't actually go on the island to explore in most cases. Mm-hmm. I think maybe, some animal flora and fauna research, and that's about it.
Yeah, so let's talk about kind of the options available. We did a kind of a land-based tour where we stayed in Santa Cruz and then on Isabela, the other big island. But I think maybe the most common way to see the islands is to go on a liveaboard boat.
Yeah, I mean, the Galapagos is famous for scuba diving. It's one of the most world-renowned spots for scuba diving in the world. So lots of people go there to do that diving. Therefore, they live on a boat And the boat kind of cruises around not only the bigger islands, but also some of those smaller rock islands where you can just get good views of the sea life. And I guess the coral as well.
Yeah, and you can kind of spread out and get more of a experience of the whole thing versus just a couple of main zones.
Yeah, and I think too, we did a tour. My parents came down to join us, so we did a tour that was a little bit more out of our budget or out of the backpacker budget. And it was interesting because we talked to backpackers who also did, you can stay at hostels and they can organize sort of like day-to-day tours. The Galapagos isn't really the type of spot where you can just do things on your own. There's lots of places where you can't just go without a guide. You do need a guide for most of the big sort of sites or for most of the hiking. It is a pretty protected area in that regard.
Yeah, lots of rules and regulations about what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot bring.
Yeah, I mean, it
cannot go.
Yeah, it's a national park. You pay a fee upon entering it. Like, it is part of Ecuador, but at the same time, Ecuadorian citizens from the mainland can't even move there. Like, Galapagonian citizens, is that the right word?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's Galapagos. I don't know.
Yeah, like it's almost like a separate country within a country. Like, it's sort of a whole different world. You know, like Ecuadorian citizens maybe don't pay as much to get there as foreigners do, but they still can't. You can't just be like, oh, I want to move to the Galapagos, off to Puerto Aero on Santa Cruz, going to live there. Like, it's not possible to do that.
Yeah. And your point was, with all the rules, regulations, if you are there backpacking, you do, even if you don't do one big tour, you kind of have to engage in a whole bunch of little tours to get out and see things.
Yeah, for sure. That was my point. Off track. Just so much to say. I'm so excited.
So we've kind of been hopping around on the topics we wanted to talk about, kind of like we hopped around between islands on our tour.
Ba-boom, boom, shh. You're hilarious.
But our tour was booked through a company called Red Mangrove.
Yeah, so I just found them online. I looked up sort of a bunch of different resources for affordable, well-known tours that was going to give us sort of an authentic experience. That's something that my parents were going to enjoy since they were going to be down there. And I found Red Mangrove, and they were awesome. We were picked up from the airport by our adorable tour guide, Rafi. He was about Ryan and I's age, so mid-20s, born and raised in the Galapagos. And he took us to the resort. They transported us, fed us immediately. It was pretty good. Yeah,
it was really nice. And it was like quite the change of pace from our previous like month and a half of just kind of roughing it around Colombia and Ecuador.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many pros and cons to changing up your routine like that. Like having sort of that luxurious experience, having the room to ourselves and this buffet full of food that we didn't have to pay for. And it's like, oh man, I can just pig out, and, you know, these beautiful views right on the ocean and like a complimentary welcome drink. Like all of that was amazing.
Yeah. So it was a pretty nice accommodation, nice tour, I guess. Right? Higher budget tour.
Yeah. I'd say it's like mid to higher budget. You know, when I was looking at the different options, there are things that are a lot more expensive than what we paid, and you could also do it a lot more affordable. So yeah, mid to higher range budget. Yeah.
So like, do you want to give like a bit of an overview of the types of tours?
Yeah. So, like I researched a lot with Red Mangrove, and they do like a land and sea option. So you spend some days sleeping at their land resorts, some sleeping aboard boats. You can do primarily, like, I think we did a Darwin's Land experience. So you combine like snorkeling or scuba diving. We did snorkeling with like hiking during the day. You know, you get to visit the turtles. You visit a lot more of like the land things. You get to see Darwin's Research Station, that sort of thing. And then you can just do sea options as well. And then you can do like land packages, but instead of snorkeling, you do diving. So you go on different boats. They take you to different areas. There's a whole bunch of different options, and you can do anywhere from like 3 to 21 days type thing.
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention, because I didn't really realize this in advance, is that like there are hostels on Santa Cruz and Isabela too. There's hostels and bars. It's not like that dissimilar from like, you know, an island destination other places.
Like Hawaii or I don't know, like Bali or I haven't actually been to
like maybe
Bali.
some Thai islands.
Thai islands, yeah,
like
for sure.
I remember being on Isabela and you can walk along the beach and then there's a couple hostels and like hostel bars and stuff where you can go and there's like sports played and music. It's like, this doesn't really feel that isolated. Kind of like I was expecting to be a bit more isolated.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, like that was definitely, you know, I think both of us expected something that was a bit more desolate, not as many people. We still saw more wildlife than I expected.
Yeah, the wildlife it's spectacular. It's all over the place. And we get to Red Mangrove, which is kind of on the bay in Santa Cruz. And then you go out on the patio and there's sea lions all over the place. Gigantic iguanas, which kind of freaked me out a bit at first.
Like they're the size of a toddler.
Yeah, really big lizards. And then you've got all these, the blue-footed boobies, and then there's big pelicans, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the coolest things for me watching the birds hunting fish. Because they swoop around in the air and then just dive straight into the water. And the boobies are really like, I don't want to use the word good, but they seem like well practiced. They dive in and they're like an arrow and they just like go swoosh, like a diver diving into the water in like a pool.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the pelicans kind of look more like a belly flopper. They just kind of like smash their face in the water. Not very elegant, but I think effective. But it's funny, our guide was telling us that they, like, because they are so ungraceful, they actually end up going blind because they smash their eyes in the water so much.
I forgot about that. It's pretty funny. I feel like that's like me versus you. Me being the belly flopper, you being the graceful diver.
Maybe. But I think our tour worked really well for where we were at knowledge-wise. Mm-hmm. Like we got to go out and get an education about the different types of animals, and like we were really able to just enjoy like seeing some of the tortoises, scuba diving with the turtles, seeing fish and all the finches, which are the little birds that Darwin really studied a lot. I think to go really out and really go in search of more, I guess, maybe unique experiences or get onto some of the more isolated islands. And I think you might be able to appreciate that a lot more if you had more background information.
I think too, like if you had a background in biology or you were super interested in like birds specifically, like if you're a big bird watcher, I mean, there's so many different species of finches and birds on those islands that it'd be cool to just watch them for hours. I don't really have that interest for birds. So like, I think they're cool. Like, I think it was cool seeing them, but our guide was pointing out all the different types of finches and we must have seen like 10 different species. And I'm like, oh sweet. Like that one's black with like a white spot. Yeah. Like, they look the same.
That's an experience. Like when we were looking at the finches, like, cause there's a wide array of them. And I think that's kind of, Darwin was really studying them and seeing like how specialized each were. Like some had bigger beaks because they lived on the grounds. They need to smash up nuts. Like some live in the trees, and like very different in each different spot that they live in. And so we were walking around looking for this like specific type of like red finch. And it's funny seeing some people who are like knowledgeable about birds, and it's really like they kind of get off on it more because like they know like this thing's unique. If we see one, like that's going to be special. And versus me, I'm like, yeah, I've seen like tons of these little fuckers all over the place. Like,
yeah, I'm good.
But not that specific red one, but I don't really know what's special about it. So
like
I can't
just a
really,
little red bird.
Yeah, don't really get that excited about it.
It's kind of interesting too, because we went walking around looking for this like little red finch, and we walked past these like crazy dogs that were barking, and like, I mean, it's a little bit scary. Like I don't have a rabies shot. I don't know how close the nearest hospital is. Like Ryan's kind of uncomfortable. My mom is like losing her mind. She's just freaking out. It's like we see this bird and like all of us are kind of like, you know, out of our group of 4 is kind of like, sweet, a red bird. Like there's these angry dogs. Like, let's get out of here. And, you know, a few people on our tour are just snapping photos. So excited. Just, you know, definitely different interest levels there. But I think overall our tour was pretty good for where we were at, for sure.
Yeah. one of the because I didn't even know how large the tortoises were, and I think the tortoises to me are like maybe the stars of the Galapagos.
Oh, 100% for me too.
And one of the moments that sticks into my mind is like where we take this bus, because I guess I kind of thought they'd be more like near the water, but they really get up into the land. And so we were cruising down to this area where they're like, a lot of them are usually around because it was mating season. And then like looking for tortoises. And then we're just in the bus on the way to the farm. And then I think your dad saw one and he's like, holy shit. Like,
I think it was like our tour guide pointed out, it was like, oh, there's one over there. And everybody's like, where? And my dad's like, where? And everybody's like, oh my God. And then he's like, where is it? And we're like, right there. And he was just like, holy shit. He like thought it was a giant rock on the side of the road.
They're way bigger than I would have expected.
Oh,
when
they're
I hear
massive.
Big tortoises, I'm like, okay. Like I picture, what in my mind seems like big. And it's like, these things are gigantic.
I think they're 200 kilos, aren't they?
Yeah. Something
it's like 500 pounds. Like the average tortoise. It's funny too, because when we saw them, it was mating season, and it's just really funny to see these like dinosaur looking creatures. Like they're really Jurassic, and they're so old and they're so slow, and they just seem lethargic, like they're wading through molasses, and these like males chasing these females, but just moving so slow. It's just so funny.
Yeah, that's one of my other memories. We were at the same place, and we were kind of just walking around seeing all the turtles in a bunch of different places, and I did see one male chasing a female, and the males will just follow the females around, and then eventually like they catch them, and the females like usually give up at that point in time. But this male, and the female are just, it's just like they're so slow. Like she's running away, he's trying to catch her. They're just moving at like a snail's pace.
I feel like you can't even use the runner. Like she's not running away. Yeah, she's not running away.
She's like slowly walking away. It's funny to think about how like when we as humans perceive a fly running around, you're like, Jesus, that thing's like so scatterbrained. Like it's moving all over the place. It's like so frenetic. And in a turtle's mind, he must see humans and be like, oh God, what's going on?
Just like can't even process how fast we're moving.
Yeah. And so one of the aspects of being on a tour is that there are other people with you on that tour. And we kind of had a bit of a learning experience, an interesting experience, because there was a gang of older Russian people, Russian Americans on our tour. And then at this same spot with the tortoises, there was a little baby turtle. And our guide was very specific about staying away from the tortoises. Like you can really scare them if they go in the shell. Like they get traumatized, like they might die because they stop doing anything. And the guys are like going up to them and like if you think he would like poke it and try to like pick it up if someone didn't tell him not to.
Yeah, our guide was pretty adamant. Like you're supposed to stay 2 meters away from them, and even that is like they hear you coming and you can just see them. Like they get scared. And everybody wants that photo with that tortoise. Like you've paid
photo with that
that photo. I mean, I think everyone who is there who wants a photo with them. I mean, you've paid to be there and you're like, this is cool. I want a photo with these. Like, I get it. I wanted that photo too, but at the same time, I don't want to traumatize a baby tortoise or traumatize an older tortoise that could perhaps die because I scared it. Yeah, being with those Russian folks was definitely a learning experience. The one male was trying to get photos with the sea lions at our resort on Santa Cruz, and he's just like clapping at them. And like the sea lion is getting quite angry. It's like, that's a wild animal that you're aggravating. Like, back off. Like, you wouldn't stand there poking, like he wouldn't stand there poking me in the face, I'm assuming. Like, get out of this thing's face. Some people just don't think about, like, they just think about animals there for their enjoyment, and that's not what the animals are there for, especially in a place like the Galapagos.
Yeah, I guess it's something we're kind of brought up with.
Yeah, especially like growing up, I think in Western Canada or in Canada in general, like we've got a lot of wild animals here, and it's also part of our culture to just, we're taught as young children, like I would never get out of the car to run at a bear. Like I just wouldn't do that. I mean, that's putting my life in danger, but it's also disrespectful to the animal when it's in its environment.
Yeah. But so the point I was trying to make is that when you do get on like a longer trip with people, you've kind of got to deal with these people you don't really want to deal with. I remember it was like the first day and we saw these guys kind of harassing sea lions and just like, oh man, I really hope those people aren't on our tour. And they were, and it turned out to be fine. But I think that's something to consider when like thinking about booking a tour. Maybe if you're going it alone, you won't have to deal with people like that. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, we've kind of dealt with that. We talked about in our Greek islands episode, talking about Kentucky, as well as, my conversation with Rory, discussing his experiences with Kentucky. Anytime you go on a tour, there is that sort of like stress about, what type of people are going to be on my tour. Because when you're just with a travel partner or you're just alone or you've chosen the people that you're going to be with, you kind of have that control. When you book a tour, it's out of your control who you're going to be with. And once you've signed up for it, you can't really change that. So it's definitely, that's a con of a tour, I would say.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on it earlier, but your parents came down to visit and were kind enough to take us on this Galapagos tour, which was amazing.
Yeah. So my parents came down for my 25th birthday. So I actually turned 25 on the Galapagos Islands. Which was pretty cool. It was obviously amazing that they did that trip for us. It was also interesting because, my parents travel very differently than you and I do on our own. I think had we done the Galapagos on our own, it would have been a very different experience. Who knows if it would have been better or worse.
Yeah, even on our own, I was pretty uncertain about if we would be able to afford it because it becomes such a gigantic trade-off when you're in somewhere like Ecuador that's really inexpensive. You can stretch the money you spend to do 5 days on the Galapagos into a long time in Ecuador. So it's definitely something you think about.
Yeah, for sure. So our routine kind of changed when my parents came down. We kind of were being very cost effective while we were in Colombia and Ecuador, just trying to find like cheap menus of the day, cheap restaurants. And we don't go so far as eating places that seem like grungy or super dirty or anything, but we were trying to get pretty authentic experiences and just, if we get sick, we get sick.
Except for Juan Valdez and Republic de Cacao.
Okay, that was $4 hot chocolate.
$4 on hot chocolate and Mariposa. What's the tourist area in Quito? Mariscal.
Yeah, we stayed in the touristy area in Quito, and we stayed near Juan Valdez, which is a super popular coffee shop in Colombia and Ecuador, and we just spend so much money on lattes every day and the chocolate place nearby. Ecuador is pretty famous for chocolate, so if you're down there, make sure to get a bar.
Yeah, there's this chocolate store called Republica de Cacao, which is like really fancy chocolate from Ecuador, but they have like free samples, so you can go in and like pick around at all the samples and then buy yourself a delicious hot chocolate, which is still like a little bit of money, but when you eat a ton of samples, it pays itself off.
That's kind of a tangent on having my parents come down.
But so it's something I think a lot of people can relate to. People on long backpacking trips do have family members come visit them at certain points, or friends at the same time. And it's quite a large shift when you have to start worrying about what other people want to do. Like you said, it changes up your routine.
Yeah, for sure. And, I'm kind of a every 2 to 3 hours eater, whereas like my dad is a pretty picky eater and he generally eats just 3 meals a day and he doesn't need to eat for like 5 hours. And so, accommodating and getting used to somebody else's schedule is a little bit difficult. It's kind of finding that rhythm with a whole new, like with a bigger group, and accommodating a group's needs is a lot more difficult, I found, than just you and I.
And I think, like you said, accommodating a group's needs is something that's difficult. And that's one thing that happens when you get maybe together with your family. You start worrying about accommodating other people's needs versus just worrying about accommodating your own needs and having kind of faith in them accommodating their own needs and standing up for what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think whenever you're in a group situation and it's like, oh, what should we do? There's a lot of like, I don't care, like whatever you want, like why don't you choose? And I feel like that is a difficult situation to be in. It kind of puts pressure on, you know, the person who's making that decision to be confident enough to be like, oh, I think that all of us are really going to like this. Let's do this today.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked about it, I think, in our Spain episode when we met up with a friend and we were going around looking for places to eat. And we were all like, I don't know. I don't care. I don't know. And it's not that none of us weren't intrigued by some of these places, but no one was like assertive enough to just say like, yeah, I want to go here. Because once you do make that push to like, I want to go here, if you're feeling emotionally responsible for other people and they don't enjoy their food, then you kind of feel responsible for that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I felt that for sure in our trip to Ecuador with my parents, as well as I sort of felt like this emotional responsibility in terms of them like staying safe, not getting anything stolen. Like it was always like...
And this was more so after the Galapagos, when we were in Quito, before and after.
Yeah, before and after the Galapagos. The Galapagos was great because we had safes in our rooms and we were on this tour that was really structured. And I think that's, you know, my parents really like that kind of, you know, traveler vacationing. Whereas when we were somewhere like Quito, you know, it's kind of a dangerous city and it's, my dad has wads of cash and he's like counting them in the middle of a plaza. And I'm like, you can't do that here. Like you're going to get your stuff stolen. But it's like, I feel this emotional responsibility because I don't want him to have a bad time somewhere that I suggested that they come. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. Like you're feeling responsible for it?
Yeah, responsible for things that are happening. It's sort of the same as like suggesting a restaurant and, you know, somebody not enjoying their food and then feeling this responsibility because you suggested it.
So would you say you felt maybe a bit more stress with traveling with your parents because you felt like you had to take on this initiative to ensure they had a good time?
Yeah, I think there was stress traveling with my parents. I think too, I've experienced that, you know, in Spain. I definitely had that. If I was like, let's go here, let's do this, worrying that you and Nora had a good time. I experienced the same thing when I went to Vegas with girlfriends. Like, it's like, I don't want, you know, to put too much of an opinion out there because I don't want people to be unhappy because they've done things that I want to do. So I think being assertive when you're traveling in a group is really important. You know, if you're hungry, you need to speak up. If you're not having fun, you need to speak up. You need to be, you know, confident in yourself and you need to have confidence that the people around you are okay to take care of themselves.
Yeah. And that's one of the nice things about hanging out with people who are really, I don't know, like kind of like self-interested, self-reliant, assertive.
Independent.
You never have to worry about, I've noticed this in a work environment too. When you have someone who's going to tell you like, oh, you know, I'm feeling really tired of doing this thing. Can you do it for me? And like, if they tell you versus like you having to, you know, watch them and try to look for signs of, oh, do they need help? Do they not? Just like being able to trust, like, okay, they're going to tell me if they need help. And if they don't, that's fine. Yeah. It makes life so much easier when people are just willing to say, I don't want to do this. I want to do this.
Yeah, 100%. Getting back to our tour, I think that it worked well to be with my parents because we were kind of all on that same schedule and routine. And I was able to relax a little bit because I wasn't worried about, you know, whether or not they were having fun. Like my mom and I picked that tour together and I was like, okay, if she's not enjoying this, this is kind of on her, not me as well. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's just like, since you're not the one making the plans, you don't have that responsibility.
Yeah, for sure. And I think yes to that.
Yeah. But so just, I think this reminds me of people looking for less responsibility in a workplace. Just like hear me out here, but like being free of responsibility isn't really the thing you should be after. It's like being able to handle the responsibility.
Yeah.
So like when I go to a lower responsibility workplace, it's not, initially it makes me feel good because I've been in situations where I've had way more responsibility than I can handle. Just because I don't feel like I was educated to handle that responsibility. So going to a lower responsibility, I really want to get to a point where I can handle the responsibilities I do have and then maybe try to take some on. and be very cognizant of the responsibilities I can handle, not just always looking out for situations where I can duck out of responsibility.
I think I get what you're saying. I think. Maybe I don't get what you're saying.
Well, sorry, I just interpreted you saying it was nice being on tour because I didn't have that responsibility. It was a good thing.
Okay,
it is like a bit more relaxing, but it's not the ideal.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to be confident in the decisions that you make. I think too, being in South America, we did see a lot of deferral of responsibility within the culture there. It's you go and you say something, or you give feedback, or you have a complaint, and it's like, oh, well, I'm not responsible for that. Like, that's not my fault. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not my fault was something we heard so often. And it's like, oh, I can't do anything for you. Like, that's not my fault. And then it's asking somebody higher up, and then it's like asking somebody else higher up. And it's
and
like, somebody just own this.
Everyone I remember trying to get a refund somewhere, and it's like the one person calls someone over, they have to phone someone, and then that person on the phone's not even sure. And even when someone makes a mistake, they don't want to apologize because to apologize would be to take on some responsibility or like be interpreted. It's only, I think what makes that so much more apparent in South America versus Canada, North America, is just because the economic opportunities are so limited, that there's a lot more fear about losing your job versus here people are willing to. I don't know what it is specifically, but I think I'm reading the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Like, she really like details how kind of as more fear gets brought up, people duck away from responsibilities, and it has really negative consequences. Yeah,
for sure. I'm not that far into the book, but yeah, I agree with that point. Getting back to the Galapagos Islands.
Okay.
Like, the Galapagos Islands are famous. Like, they're a world-renowned location. When we tell people we've been to the Galapagos, even traveling South America, they're like, oh, wow, you went? Like, that's so cool. What were they like? And I think that they were amazing. Like, I had an amazing time there, and I'm super grateful that we had the chance to go there. I think it was such a cool place to experience. We've talked about some of our big memories, but did you find that you appreciated being in the Galapagos, like, for how quote unquote special of a location it is?
I really enjoy going there and getting to see it, but there's definitely a lot of like what you just said about, it's one of those places where you feel cool to have gone. Like, it's like, oh, I've been to the Galapagos. That's so nifty because people know about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things about being on a tour, though, is you're kind of like, it's easier to just be kind of going through the motions, like, oh, stop, check this out. But I think the thing about the Galapagos is there's so many spectacular things that it really does like bring you into the moment. Like, when you see these gigantic tortoises, you're like, wow. Or when you go scuba diving and there's just like sea life everywhere. I remember this one moment we were scuba diving and you could see
snorkeling.
Sorry. There was a bunch of sea turtles sleeping, and we were kind of just like hovering around them. And then like all of a sudden one like wakes up and like swims like right by you. It's crazy.
Yeah, like, it's such a surreal experience, and it's like, did a sea turtle actually just like swim right underneath me? And even sea lions, like, they were just in the water that we were in. Like, it wasn't just like Nemo fish and some cool coral. Like, we actually swam with some pretty cool sea life, which was really amazing. I completely agree with what you said. Like, tours for me are usually like, you get on a bus and like you listen to the guide, and it kind of just becomes going through the motions because you don't have to think about stuff. Like, one of the great things about travel is that you do have so much logistical stuff to figure out, like, and especially in a country that's, third world, or there's a language barrier. It's like that travel aspect is stressful and it's difficult and it's exhilarating, and being on a tour takes all of that away. I think in the Galapagos, though, I was able to still appreciate the surroundings around me because it was so spectacular.
Yeah. And thinking back on it, that's funny. One thing I thought about when writing this point to talk about was we did this hike up to the top of a crater, and I feel like that was one thing maybe I didn't appreciate as much. For whatever reason, I just wasn't present with it. I think partly because the hike up the mountain, the hike up was quite slow, so maybe I wasn't challenged, and I wasn't paying attention, so I kind of got lost in thought. And we got up there, and I looked, I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like a gigantic crater. It is pretty spectacular, but it didn't really like strike me. And then we were just sitting there, and I was talking to Rafi, our like logistics guide, I guess, when we were like talking about religion, and that was like a really good moment for me. Like I really enjoyed getting there, just talking to someone who lives there, and like getting into his thoughts about religion, because he's grown up in such like a hardcore Catholic setting, which is something I'm not used to. But it's like you go to the Galapagos for the wildlife and stuff. But one of my coolest moments was just having a conversation with someone. But then that could happen anywhere, you know? That could happen on the mainland for way less money.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think that brings up an interesting point because, to have a good experience, you don't necessarily need, I'm going to do quote unquote again, world-renowned scenery. That is like the Sierra Negro crater is the second largest land crater in the world. I mean, that is pretty spectacular, and not a lot of people get to see that. So it is a pretty cool thing to see. And I think it's so interesting that the experience that you had there was made amazing by a really great conversation. I think it just goes to show that you really don't need to spend a ton of money, and you don't have to do something super great to have a really good experience. Sometimes the best memories are just opening yourself up and being vulnerable and being authentic. And
so much of appreciation is an internal thing.
Yeah.
Like people a lot of times seek this external amazement and appreciation instead of working on cultivating a sense of amazement and appreciation internally. Like when you think about how amazing it is that today in 2014, maybe 2015, you can listen to us talking at our house through microphones that cost us not very much money. We're putting it online for not very much money. You're taking it off of your phone for free, listening through headphones. Like, how did our voices get into your ears? Like, that's an amazing thing, and we take it for granted.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so seeing this world's second largest land crater is a pretty amazing thing, but it's still easy to take for granted if you're not really
present.
Yeah, not present and not focused on appreciating it.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to what we were talking about in our Colombia episode last week. Like everything when we first got to South America was new and exciting. And after you've traveled for something like 6 months, it kind of just becomes very normal. You wake up, you're like, oh, what do I want to do today? I've got all this freedom. And it's kind of, you're not amazed by that anymore. It's just what you do every day. And I read a really great quote the other day about how being in a routine is really one of the worst things that you can do.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the beauties about traveling, is because it's really hard to get in a routine. You kind of get these things that can become routine, staying in a nice hostel, you get up, you find like the cafe, but there's still enough differences to kind of keep you varied. And the point I wanted to make about going to these amazing destinations is that it's easy to start to think that these things are going to be amazing and you're going to be awed and just like inspired by these amazing destinations. But it's not that simple. Like when you hear people talk about the Galapagos, you think you're going to go there and have this like beautiful, amazing experience, but that's not necessarily going to happen if you're not in the right headspace. Like you could go there and just be like, these turtles are big. I've seen them on the internet already. Whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
I think so.
You could. I don't know. They're pretty spectacular.
Yeah, but I'm just like, you don't.
Yeah,
chasing these like renowned destinations isn't necessarily going to give you everything you might expect. I think it's very important to focus on appreciating what you have, and then when you go to something that's really amazing, you'll appreciate that even more.
For sure. So that kind of brings me into the last thing I think that we wanted to talk about. is the Galapagos a must-see in South America? What do we recommend to our listeners? Should they go? Should they not go? What's your opinion? Would you go again?
I think a couple things kind of lead me to say that it's not like a must-do thing. The first one being that, like, if you're young going on a backpacking trip to South America, maybe in the future you can go on a trip just to the Galapagos Islands. Quito is a pretty big transport hub. It's not that many time zones different than North America. I think you can go there on a 3-week vacation. Like if we did 5-6 days on the Galapagos, you can go fly to Quito, have a couple days, go to the Galapagos, fly back to Quito, go back home. Like you can do that as a vacation, so you don't necessarily have to do that while you're on your trip.
For sure.
I think so much of the point of long-term travel is to get kind of more in-depth experiences. And we kind of talked about it in our micro backpacking episode, which isn't actually about tiny backpacks, although that would be fun.
Ryan has a thing for like really big stuff or super tiny things.
Episode 32.
Stay tuned.
But kind of lost track of what I was going to say. Not creating a 6-month trip of 2 weeks trips, creating a 6-month trip, something that you're never going to be able to achieve in smaller trips. So I think that you can go to the Galapagos on a smaller trip. Also, I think that you have this island where it's going to be really expensive to go to. You can live in Ecuador comfortably for like $15 a day.
Yeah.
As a backpacker, and you go to the Galapagos, it's way more expensive.
Like it's $400 just for round trip flights.
Yeah, so like realistically,
that's just flights.
A week in the Galapagos is going to cost you like a month in mainland Ecuador?
Yeah.
Probably even more.
Depending on how much money you spend and how you choose to do it, I think.
Yeah. So like I think for me, if I'm really thinking about that trade-off, maybe I say go with the longer term somewhere else, and just because you can get amazing experiences all over the place. Like there's some really cool things to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you're traveling on a long-term trip, it's really important to be like, okay, so I'm going to South America. Here's all like the major touristy things or major like UNESCO World Heritage Sites, world-renowned things. What am I actually interested in? Because unless you have a really, really big budget, like you can't do them all. You're going to have to pick and choose. So for us, we got to go to the Galapagos Islands, but we didn't go to Easter Island off the coast of Chile because we couldn't afford that. We didn't go to Antarctica. That's $4,000 or so.
But we did a pretty traditional loop. And we hit like a ton of the must-see stuff, like Carnival, Galapagos, Iguazu Falls, Patagonia, Machu Picchu, Salt Flat.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like we saw a ton. I'm just saying that, we didn't get to see them all. And I think the Galapagos was one of the highlights of the 6 months in my mind. So I think that if listeners out there are, if you love to scuba dive, if you like to snorkel, if you love wildlife and biology, I think that perhaps the Galapagos is something that you should make that time and money for, because it could be a really incredible life-changing experience for you. If you're just going to tick it off a bucket list, I think that Ryan's completely right. Like you could definitely do something the way my parents did. My parents were down there for somewhere between 16 and 20 days. So 2 to 3 weeks. And we saw quite a bit of stuff while we were there and got that trip in. So, yeah.
And we didn't go scuba diving there, which I feel like would have been amazing. But even that, I had some really amazing experiences, like snorkeling with so many animals, and like
lizard mating grounds, seeing sea lions take over the beach chairs on the beach,
and watching like a feeding frenzy of birds. Those are really cool things that I've never experienced before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just about individual preference. Like if you're on a backpacking party trip, like I'd probably skip the Galapagos and wait till you're looking for something a little bit deeper.
And so if you're really into animals too, that is a spectacular place to go see. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's this idea, and I kind of have gone through it with like thinking about going somewhere recently, is this idea of, I think it's like maybe like a thought problem, but like it seems
thought problem.
But like you think about like, oh, I'm going to go to South America. I'm going to go to the Galapagos, and then I'm going to fly down to Peru and go to Machu Picchu, and then I'm going to go to Iguazu Falls. I'm going to go to all these like amazing things that everyone knows about, because these things are so renowned. They must be better. Mm-hmm. And you spend 2 months flying from all these must-see destinations to must-see destinations. Like if you just hang out in some small town somewhere for 2 months, like it's so cliche to say, but it's actually, you're not necessarily going to have a better experience going to all these amazing places.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with that. You know, things that are world renowned are more touristy. They're more trampled over. They're not as authentic to the culture of the country that you're in. They've been more westernized or more Americanized, that sort of thing. They're generally more expensive in almost every experience I've had. And they're definitely not always better. I mean, there's lineups, there's expenses, there's all sorts of negative things to spending your time doing those world-renowned things, I think.
Yeah, and because they are popular destinations, they kind of take on like a similar aesthetic. Like the hotels are kind of similar and things like that.
Yeah. At the same time, I feel like the Galapagos was a little bit different from that sort of typical touristy thing. Like it is a bit touristy, but it's sort of like off the beaten path touristy, because it is so far out there and not everybody does that. Like I feel like it's very different from Machu Picchu.
Yeah. And I think the Galapagos is special because of the wildlife, and then like that's going to kind of pull you into having a great experience. Like I think everyone we saw there was just like amazed with the wildlife.
For sure. How could you not be?
The Russians were not so amazed with the walking around.
That's okay though. We'll post some photos of a lot of the cool wildlife that we did see, so you can get a good idea. And if you are planning a trip to South America, you know, just make sure you're thinking about what you're actually looking for out of your trip, and don't just go to the Galapagos just to go because other people have gone. Make sure that it's something that you actually truly want to spend your money on. Yeah. That's my advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So thanks for listening. Check out our website at www.theworldwanders.com. Send us an email at theworldwanderspodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments about the Galapagos Islands or any of our other episodes.
Adios.
Ciao.